320.
By the military-industrial complex.
It could be seen to move violently forward, violently forward, violently forward.
I'm just a patsy.
Let's win there.
I said this once or twice, but it bears repeating. If you like your current insurance, you will keep your current insurance.
You think about the Army and the Navy and the missions they run to protect the world, they run on SAP.
Well, you have done a really spectacular job. I guess pretty much everybody at this table is your customer, so
Exactly.
That's not so bad.
Exactly.
I want to congratulate
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
And we're back.
Hi.
Can you see me?
Yeah, I'm doing great. We've had a little bit of technical difficulty getting going, but I think we're good and we're going to work. So, Peter, it's good to be back.
And you're sounding great with your new microphone today. We got
right.
it all.
Yeah, we had some complaints about sound quality. I'm not sure it wasn't just my talking quality that was the problem, but we can fix the sound. I don't know if we can fix the talking quality.
Well, it's amazing what you can do with microphones. And I see your husband there. We're all waving to your husband.
Yeah, that's Dave. That's who's been putting up with me for going on.
Yeah,
long time. Let's just say a long time.
My daughter was telling me the other day how her boyfriend is her microphone, her Shure SMB, whatever it is. I can't remember what SM7B. She goes, I love my SM7B. So anyway, welcome back, everybody. This is our third installment with Mrs. Heritage History, and we were going to go and do a third look at Freemasonry, but she became so excited about the idea that there's somebody else in the world who doesn't believe that nuclear weapons are actually a real thing. I do believe that nuclear energy is a thing. I believe that you can boil water with nuclear energy. I also believe that there's a real reason for wanting to continue to create massive amounts of plutonium, and that is because it is the most carcinogenic material on the planet. And of course, if cancer is part of your business model, then being able to deploy cancer is a real thing. And so there is a real use for plutonium that a lot of people don't get into. But in any case, you wanted to change course a little bit and cover the atomic bombs, and that kind of led to a history of Japan. And so I thought that, not that I thought, you thought that it would be a better use of our time today if we kind of went over how Japan is and has always been in modern times a vassal state of the British banking syndicates, and that led us directly to the conversation about whether or not we thought that nuclear weapons were real or not. Is that a good setup?
That's a fine setup. We'll take any setup we can get. So, but I did there was a couple reasons that I was very interested in doing this show, and it's when I kind of came across Peter's material, and there was things that really interested me, and then the one that said, "Oh, there's no nukes," and I'm like, "Oh yeah," and I just didn't think anybody would say it out loud because it's fundamental. I mean, we're over there in Iraq now, right now, protecting the world from nuclear weapons, right? We don't want to nuclear Iraq, and so even today, you just can't say there's no such thing. And he said it, and then I watched the show, and it's like, wow, not only that, I have a whole bunch of reasons for not believing it that aren't even his reasons. So it's like he makes a compelling case without even me having to make my compelling case, which and so I thought this would be a good chance for me to make my compelling case, and then you can take both of the compelling cases together. But again, I am a historian. I read history. My perspective is highly historical. And there's other approaches to truth besides history. In fact, history can be a very dubious way of trying to determine truth. But when I think about it, I think he wants to kind of jump right to the nuclear stuff. And I kind of was showing him my slides where I kind of go a roundabout way. So the compromise we've decided is, we're going to maybe take about half an hour to get there. And if you just want to get right to the nukes, you can just skip the first half hours. I use slides when I talk to help me not get off track. So if you think I'm off track, even with the slides, imagine how bad I'd be without the slides. So,
yeah. And I just want to point out, because you're mentioning it, but that this morning I just saw it mentioned that the Artemis capsule that's supposedly on its way back to the moon, that the woman astronaut in her little presentation this morning was talking about what the dark side of the moon looks like from their space capsule, and they're not supposed to be in front. They're not supposed to be in a position to be able to see the dark side of the moon until tomorrow. And
I think that's hilarious.
And so there was a little bit of tension that you could notice between the astronauts when she was talking about that, because it seemed like that was the script that she was supposed to read tomorrow, and she got her days confused, which I guess if you're in a high orbit around the Earth would, maybe you get confused because you've seen the sun go up and down too many times. But in any case, let's jump in. Let's not digress and talk about astronauts. Let's just talk about Japan. So I'm going to bring up your slides here, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay. So so to stay as focused as we can, I kind of extended the bomb is fake to what I consider a lot of what the I'm just going to stick to the Pacific theater because we don't even want to talk about the non-Pacific theater. But there's a lot of problems with the Pacific theater in the World War II. You might have heard that Pearl Harbor was, false flag. People will even argue with that. But there's a lot of problems with the whole way Japan is presented. Again, we don't want to waste too much time, but I just thought it was kind of funny. I put this on my thing about the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. One of the many reasons I'm very interested in the bomb aspect thing is until I was very, very recently, I was never interested in politics. But when I was in college, like a million years ago, I was actually very, very involved in the anti-nuclear program, like fighting off, Reagan's strategic initiative thing. And so I actually, spent a couple of years of my college life being a anti-nuclear activist. And so I kind of know that the mentality, and we've almost forgot about that, but I very much, probably Peter, we're about the same age. We grew up at a time when the big threat was not global warming, but instant destruction by nuclear annihilation. It was a huge, huge deal. And so there was this group called the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and I think there's a Union of Concerned Scientists too, and they were all anti-nuclear and stuff like that. So you thought you were so smart in college, I just checked them out, and they're now focused on climate change. So, if nukes are a real threat, isn't that, if you've been convincing people that they need to be worried about instant destruction for their whole lives, and now you're talking about, carbon reduction and killing cows or something to prevent cow farts. It's crazy. It's just, another thing
it reminds me of another website that I follow, where the guy talks about ectothermic decoupling of the surface of the earth and having the poles shift 104 degrees, which is scary. Maybe
I think that's more likely than the nukes.
But he also talks about COVID fraud, again, both things can be true, and I'm not assigning motive to anyone here. But my thought is that if ectothermic decoupling of the surface of the planet from the core is a real thing, I don't really care about what they're doing with COVID.
Exactly.
It doesn't really make any difference to me. Anyway, that's my aside. Sorry.
And also, one of the reasons I can never be considered a black pillar is once you get over this horror of finding out that everything that you've been taught is a lie, and it's kind of funny. You can enjoy life again. So I say just realize it's all, and I'm using the word scripted instead of fake, because if you say wars are fake, that is just not a good thing to say. People get killed. Mm-hmm. Buildings get destroyed.
Blood sacrifices are real.
What?
Blood sacrifices
sacrifices are real. Yeah. Wars are scripted and planned, but they are not fake. The bomb, I think, is fake. Okay, so let's get going. And the other thing, as I talked about, Peter, is we're going to rush through about the first 10 slides. I
just want to make one point too about your picture, is that I watched a special once 25 years ago about the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And in that movie, in that making of movie, they were showing how they made the clouds of the aliens coming in over the horizon. And they had this giant tank of clear water, and they had guys with pitchers of milk, pouring milk into the clear water as they photographed it with these big, expensive film cameras. And I can't help, when I look at your illustration of the nuclear explosion here, thinking about if you turn it upside down and you could see the guy with the pitcher of milk pouring the milk into the water.
Very right, but 100%. Yeah, there's a reason they call it a theater of war. Okay.
Yes.
So, okay. So let's get going. And the first couple slides are going to be kind of about my worldview. And if you don't like my worldview, I'm okay with that. I don't care. But the reason atomic bombs are so important is they set the stage for the Cold War. So you had to bring the end to the kinetic fighting. You could kill a whole bunch of people. You could blow up buildings. You could cause all sorts of stress and trauma. But we had to get to the point where you could have a Cold War. And this is a term I use from you, revelation of method. So I believe 1984, that book was the revelation of method, that it was published in 1948, flip 48. And it says what they're doing. So we're ending the kinetic war, but we want to be on a permanent war footing. And so we're going to create this multipolar world where everybody's armed with nukes, and we're going to have a fearful population, and we're going to have nuclear deterrence, and we're going to have security councils, and we're going to have intelligence agencies, and we're going to have doublespeak. It's the whole thing. So, and so this picture is revelation for this. Is look at this picture, then go to the next slide.
Here we go. Hang on, getting my controls here.
Okay, so I wish I had a sort of bigger version of this, but this is roughly the state of the world in terms of Cold War politics. And it's kind of similar in many ways to the actual world that we just saw, which is the Oceania versus East Asia thing. And it's very, very much the Soviet Union is the horrible, dangerous, fanatical power. Then we've got up and coming communist China, which nobody would have predicted. Nobody in 1940 would have ever dreamed that communist China would ever be a thing in 1950. So they really, really did this. So my theory of, now you can't say this was the purpose of World War II, because there was many purposes of World War II. But
they call it goal stacking.
Goal stacking. This was a majorly goal stacked. But one of the goals was to end up in the 1984 Cold War. And to do that, you needed Europe split, communist versus free. And to do that, again, okay, the point I was going to make here on the slide is it's very simple what they're doing. Once you see it, it's very obvious what they're doing. So the difficulty and the scripting is not in making it happen, because they can make it happen. The scripting is in making it appear as though it was something authentic or organic and out of control, and it was unpreventable. And so that's what all the scripting is about. So in order for Russia to take over half of Europe, it couldn't just march in there, because then the free people of the world, the free people, they would have opposed the takeover. But if you've got the big bugaboo Hitler, he takes over Eastern Europe, then you can have the Soviets liberate Eastern Europe. And the same trick was going on in China. They wanted China to go communist. That was the goal. And so whereas they had Hitler as the bugaboo for Europe, they had Japan as the bugaboo for Asia. They go in, and then the communist Chinist liberates China from Japan. Didn't go so smoothly. It didn't go as smoothly as they wanted, so they had to kind of force things along at the end there. But this was, in my view, the goal. And I don't care if you agree with me. This is the way I perceive things. And this is not from studying 20th century history. This is from studying 19th century history, which we'll get to in the next slide. So, and the goal is worldwide military control. And look what we have. We've got a reason for these intelligence agencies, and a reason for spying, and a reason for all the surveillance. And then we've got a reason to have U.S. military bases all over the world, because we're defending freedom all over the world and we have a containment policy. So this was what the goal of the world, this was the goal. The Cold War was the world, and we switched from Russia to Islamic terrorism, but it's kind of the same playbook. Okay, so let's keep going. So I don't want to spend time on this, but it's very interesting. I could do a whole show on this, but again, my view of the world, having studied 19th century history very deeply, is that there's already centralized control of money and commerce, and there has been for over 100 years. Therefore, ergo, 20th century wars are scripted, because they're centralized, the same money powers who are behind the United States are also behind South America, are also behind Africa, are also behind Russia, are also behind China. So there is, if there's wars, it's because they want wars. If there's conflicts before, they want conflicts, and they use ideology and they use different ways of doing control, like what I call the Freemason republics. It's a little more complicated than that. I'm always willing to get more complicated, but we're just going to shorthand call it Freemason republics. There's two types of Freemason republic. There's a Anglo Freemason republics, and then there's the continental Freemason republics under sort of control, but they're all Freemasons. And then if you go back about how the funding for the Soviet Union actually happened and how the funding for Chinese communists actually happened, it all goes back to the same financial forces. And it's pretty obvious, and it's going to be more obvious when we finish talking about Japan. Okay, so let's go on. And the next thing I have to do is, because I'm a history teacher and I love history, and I'm going to go through the history of Japan as quick as I can, because I think a lot of people already sort of know this, but I'm just going to walk through. So before the big takeover of Japan in the 19th century, there was an emperor, but the emperor had no power and had never had any power. The way Japan has always worked is that there was clans, and whatever clan was the regent for the emperor, that is, had physical possession of the emperor, that was the effective ruler, but it was very distributed. It wasn't really centralized until the 16th century or the 17th century even. So there was wealthy landowners. The shogun was the main ruler of the clan that had possession of the emperor. Okay. And what they would do is they marry the emperor off at 13. He'd have a son. As soon as he had a son, he'd go off to a monastery, and the new baby son would be the emperor. And, so the emperor always needed a regent to protect him, because he was always 3 years old. So, so that's kind of how Japan's, there's very much interesting about Japan. So then, so that's the classes you care about. So anyway, that at the time of the opening of Japan, the Tokugawa clan was in charge, and their base was in Tokyo, and they had ruled since the 1600s, and they had had an isolationist policy since the 1600s. And the reason they had an isolationist policy was because the Jesuits had visited about 80 years since then and introduced Western religions and Western guns and Jesuit treachery. And so they started to realize, they looked around, they saw.
What was the treachery?
This is too. We will have another discussion of Jesuit treachery another time. But the reason Japan was centralized is because Western weapons got filtered to one particular crowd, and also they set up trade in southern Japan, and they and anyway, we don't want to get too much into the treachery, but I would say that it very much in their minds was looking at what had happened in the Philippines. So
Right.
in the Philippines,
Isn't that the pattern? Is that
yes,
that they come into a place that's basically undeveloped. They pick the people that they want to be the warlords, and then they arm them.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a short story. It's a very interesting story, but I'm just going to skip over it so we can get to the American saviors. Okay, we're going to talk about the American saviors now. So there's this story about how Matthew Perry came in and he prepared. It's just this big romantic story, and it's all BS because he came in with all of his having studied Japan culture and understood. I don't know. I'm not going to go over the whole Matthew Perry myth here. He basically came in with guns blaring but shooting blanks as a show of power. But again, in the context of there had only 15 years previously, the Opium Wars had devastated China, and the British had come in and been incredibly brutal. And ongoing at this time was the Taiping Rebellion in China, which was clearly funded and supplied by outside of China. And it was an absolute disaster. So with the guns blaring, the Taiping Rebellion it was one of the bloodiest wars ever in history, and it was ongoing at this time. And the recent first wave of the Opium Wars, which were, forced open China, you have to believe that they did not want, they kicked Westerners out. They knew Westerners were treacherous. They didn't want anything to do with the West. They were self-sufficient, or very, very close to being self-sufficient. And they had no choice. It was just another unequal treaty. And they were forced to kind of go along with it and go on diplomatic missions and pretend that this was a good thing for China, for Japan. It was a disastrous thing for Japan, but I'm pretty sure the leaders thought that they could contain the harm and that it was better to be allied with the United States than with Britain. But that's not what happened. What?
So if I might ask you this question, it seems like there's this reoccurring pattern here, which is that, which it's the good cop, bad cop, right?
Exactly.
In Freemasonry, they call it the white hand and the black hand. The mafia is famously the black hand, right? And it's funny because in Italian, the word for left is sinistra, sinister, and the word for right is destra, destiny. So you have sinister and destiny, left and right. And it seems like that this is a reoccurring Freemasonic pattern, which is that you present people with two choices, the good guys and the bad guys, who you want to be able to side with. And the British had kind of established themselves as the bad guys. And so it seemed like this, if you're given a choice, if you're the Japanese and you're given a choice between whether or not you want to deal with the bad guys, the British, or the good guys, the Americans.
It's two hands on the same body.
Exactly.
So
that was my point.
But the key is there's all these, things that are part of the treaty, but the thing that killed Japan, and this was 100% intentional, this is what they wanted, because the important thing is Japan just didn't want to trade that much. So opening up for trade, as long as it wasn't opium, and they still had some amount of control of their people, they might be able to tolerate that. And they, but they didn't see what it meant to allow free exchange of silver and gold. That is what killed them. So let's go to the next slide. So because they weren't part of the world economy, the silver to gold trade within Japan, the Kaban was the issued gold official currency of Japan. And you could trade 5 silver pieces for a katon. Well, the exchange in Europe was 15 to 1. So this was called the Yokohama Gold Rush. Within 10 years or less, I think it was, most of it happened within about 5 years. The amount of gold was completely drained from Japan. Almost all the katons were gone. And in order to stop the flow, the shogun had to debase the currency by a third, because that's what he had to actually change the amount of gold in whatever he could have, and even in silver. And so that caused economic turmoil, inflation, and it, of course, this is one of the things, is when you want, and you see this trick again and again, and you saw it back to Iran. If you want to see how and why they got the fake, spontaneous uprising against the Shah, it was because they crashed the Iranian economy. Okay, and so
they use it by, this is called arbitrage. I just wanted to, for people who don't understand, they're looking at 1 in 5 and 1 in 15. If Japan has an exchange rate where 1 ounce of gold is equal to 5 ounces of silver, then what the European bankers would do is that they would flood Japan with silver, and they would buy all of the gold for a rate that was 300%.
It came to be 200% profit, but it was still insanely profitable.
Yes,
and this wasn't even trade. This was just draining all the gold from the country. They didn't really establish a trade of things that really benefited the technology. I think they were probably starting to import certain technology.
You would ship tons of silver to Japan. You would take out huge amounts of gold, take them back to Europe, where they were worth 3 times, where it was worth 3 times as much.
Yeah, and, so it took very little time. Okay, so that was that. So with all of the Matthew Perry blah blah blah, this was a plan to drain all the gold from Japan, make a mint, and then destroy the government. So it all worked. It worked beautifully. Okay, so next slide is what they did as the next move, okay, is that the Satsuma and Choshu were 2 of the clans. There was many clans in Japan. I don't remember them off the head without my notes, but these weren't big clans. These were smaller clans, and they were south. They were both located near the south of Japan, near Nagasaki. And I wish I had a map of Japan, but basically Nagasaki was a southern trading post, and we'll talk about it later. But it was where Nagasaki is one of the port cities that's closest to Korea and closest to China. And so it was a very strategic port for trade. It's quite far from Tokyo. And this was the area where these people were from, not surprisingly, because that's where, most of the foreigner mischief was going on. But anyway, what they did is we talked about how the emperor was at the top, but he had no power. So what these clans pretended to do, and of course, these clans were the ones that were backed by the merchants, okay, who were mostly based in Nagasaki, and I don't want to even pronounce the other name because I don't have it written down, and I'm terrible at munching names. Anyway, I don't have it. Anyway, so there was a couple towns that were really important, and so this has happened many times in Japanese history. Nobody really panicked too much because it was just the standard thing where one clan that wanted to be the big boss clan would steal the emperor, and then they would be the regent, and they would be the shogun, and they would be the one in charge. And it was a change And then you had to figure out who you're going to be loyal to and whether you're going to fight for the Tokugawas or fight for the Satsumas. But, nobody thought that this was going to really be a big change. But how it was presented, that is, people in Japan didn't think it was going to be a big change. The way it was presented in the West was that the emperor was tired of being a puppet and he wanted to take control of Japan. And all the people in Japan were rising up to support the emperor so that he wouldn't be a puppet of the Tokugawa clan anymore. And he would be able to rule, Japan directly, as was his right, because he was a sun god, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so in Japan, they're thinking it's the same old, clans fighting over the emperor. It's been 300 years, but, we've seen this trick before. And they were mad. People were mad at the Tokugawas for making any contact at all with the Westerners. And they blamed the Tokugawas for making contact with Westerners. And so this restoration happens. So the Meiji restoration is restoring, after 2,000 years, the power of the emperor is what it's billed as. The capital was moved from Kyoto to Tokyo. Now, the Tokyo was already the place where the Tokugawa was, but the emperor had always resided forever in Tokyo. And the samurai were sent abroad to study. So we'll get to this. But anyway, so we'll talk about, but what was really happening was that the Satsuma and Choshu were the emperor's advisors. But what it ended up being is a complete, total restructuring of Japanese society, and to get rid of the samurai class entirely. They needed to get rid of the samurai class because the samurai class was the armed class, it was the educated class, it was the class that was holding traditional Japan together. So this in the first few years, so first it was the emperor ruling, and he had advisors. And the advisors were from the Satsuma and Choshu clan. And then that transformed into an elected diet, which was a parliament, dominated by, people who were loyal to the emperor. So, and there's other stuff happened that really changed society. I can't go into all the details because we got to get through this. But for our purposes, what we need to know is, number one, the samurai was sent abroad to study. Number two, the yen was adopted. They got rid of the kagan gold that was the emperor's gold before. They adopted the yen, and the yen was tied directly to the British pound. So it had the same gold weights and the same silver weights. So it was an exact, no, it wasn't the pound. It was just that you could tell how much by the amount of gold and silver that were in these coins, you could map that directly to British pound. So could be traded, as the pound at the time was the international. What? The
pound was tethered to
the pound was tethered.
Yen.
That tethered is the word I'm looking for here. So the yen was the new currency in 1981, and it was 100%, associated with the thing. And then the first central bank in Asia was the Bank of Japan. And it was formed in 1882, which is, again, about 15 years after the Meiji Restoration. And it was private.
Who funded the Bank of Japan?
Well, who do you think funded the Bank of Japan? I'd like to know names.
Bearing.
No, they have levels and levels.
Oppenheimer.
It was no. I looked. I wanted to find out. Well, who are these private funders? And it's indirect, and it was wealthy daimyo. Okay, so these daimyo who all of a sudden had millions of dollars. So it's all fronts, you know.
Teal, Musk.
Okay, so the fronts are important, and they're very good at creating fronts because they want to hide who's controlling it. So they hide who's controlling it. So it's all the Japanese funding it themselves, even though all their gold is gone. So it makes perfect sense, right? But anyway, it was a private bank that originally wasn't even controlled by the government. The government owned part of it, but it was controlled by whoever the shareholders were. It was very much a joint stock company. Okay. And that was the first central bank in Asia. It was before, there was many very dubious banks in China, but there wasn't one central one. So anyway, so that's what we got. That was we have the Meiji Restoration. We're moving to what is this pseudo Republican form, not Republican, the elected diet, so that you can tell the Americans that it's an elected government and it's parliamentary and everything like that. You know, you need the story of a thing. But this is who the Meiji leaders really were. Okay, the Meiji Restoration happened in 1866, 3 years before the Meiji Restoration. These 5 young men from the Choshu clan, called the Choshu Five, were sent to London to study. And they studied, I don't have their resumes with me right now, besides it would be a distraction if I did.
I have what they accomplished in One of them became the first prime minister of Japan. One of them became the minister of foreign affairs. Another one became created the Ministry of Public Works. One of them was the head of the National Mint in Osaka. And another one of them became the father of Japanese railways. So these guys were these were the oligarchs of Japan.
These were the oligarchs of Japan. They spent the 3 years before the Meiji Revolution in London, and they went back and became the emperor's advisors. At the same time, the Satsuma 19 got sent to London. About 3 of them came back a year later and helped form the government, and the others kind of came back over about the next 5 or 6 years. Many of them were also in the government, but they tended to be more on the technical side. It was already recognized that Japan needed technical expertise. Okay. And so these were the people who were sent before the Meiji Restoration. Once the Meiji Restoration happened and these people got in control with their puppet masters, there was a couple very generous. I think one of them's name was Glover, if I remember right. Thomas Glover. I hope I'm getting that because that's from memory. He funded hundreds of samurai to be sent to study abroad. This was one of the ways that they completely co-opted the samurai order.
Thomas Blake Glover.
Yes, that sounds about right. Anyway, he was a Scottish merchant who operated out of Nagasaki. And most of the people he was recruiting were for technical subjects. So they were there to learn chemistry and steelwork and so it wasn't just university education. It was also sort of, learning technical things in more of a hands-on way, but also in the universities and also learning to speak fluent English and be able to understand Western ways of doing things. And this was one of the ways you broke down the samurai class. Is number one, you took away their privileges, and you made, sort of going along with the program, a requirement to continue to serve in government, which they were the governing class. Japan did have a class-based society before. I'm not saying it was paradise or perfect. I don't know what paradise or perfect would look like, but but this was one of the ways they got co-opted is, well, if you go to study abroad and become a technical, you can have importance, and you can have, you can be part of the oligarchy or part of the oligarchy minions. Okay, so there's a book on the Heritage website called A Boy of Old Japan, and it is the kind of semi-fictionalized, readable for kids life story of one of these guys. One of these guys' name was Inyo Koru, and this is his story. And it's perfect propaganda about how he was noble and wanted to do the best for his country and make his country strong. So a very strong narrative of how these people are not evil puppets of London. They are the saviors of their country. Okay. So don't be thinking that they're not the saviors of the country. So one of the ones who's kind of a hero, and movies have been made about him, is Seigo Takamura. And he was I don't think he was one of the Satsuma 19. He was a very important leader in the Satsuma clan, who about 10 years after the restoration said, oh my God, this is not what we signed up for. These people are selling everything out to the Westerners. They're destroying Japan. And he started a very successful revolution that was put down by them. At this point, the clans had to decide, were they going to go with the strong emperor, or were they going to resist the emperor and risk being forced to commit, not forced to commit harikari, because you're never forced. It's the honorable thing to do. So Seigo committed harikari, and that was that.
I just wanted to bring up this picture because a lot of people get this idea in their head, like the movie Ron by Akira Kurosawa, of guys, samurai riding around on horses and stuff. And this was a fairly modern arrangement. This is what the soldiers looked like in fighting the Satsuma rebellion in 1877. They look like fairly modern soldiers. So I just wanted to put that out.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so let's keep going. We're done with history lessons except that, okay, I'm just going to do this really super fast, but there was a Russo-Japanese War. And this was when it was like a coming out party for the new Japan. So this is about 40 years after the Meiji Revolution, two generations. By this time, Japan had battleships, armies, modern weapons, munitions, modern technologies of all types. They had completely transformed their whole country in 2 generations. They fought a war against Russia in the Sea of Japan and the Yellow Sea, and they obliterated Russia's force and just annihilated. It was an absolute no contest. Well, of course, their boats had all been built, but but after 40 years, they could build some of their own boats. Their original navy and the training was all Britain, especially Scotland. They were fair, and it was all funded by the Bank of Japan, which always had plenty of money for building up armaments. And they were basically a proxy for Britain. So as of, 40 years, 35 years before the World War II, Japan was 100% proxy for Britain. That's all it was. Okay. So just look at the map for a second. That's Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I just want to get that. They're both sort of in the south and away from Tokyo. And the other thing I was just going to mention is one of the things that's kind of interesting is at the same time the Russian-Japanese War was going on, there was a failed Russian Revolution that was either a dry run for the real one, or I think they really were trying to have the revolution happen 10 years before it did. It would have been really, convenient. It would have been in history as there was this terrible war and the Russians lost, the people were mad, and so they were angry at the Tsar and they overthrew, because it's always spontaneous, So it failed though. Okay, turns out people really would prefer their Tsar to being a puppet of London.
Wasn't that revolution also blamed on the Jews? Wasn't that part of where the pogroms?
Oh, it's it's always blame the Jews, and Jews are not innocent. But you're missing the point if you're blaming the Jews. But I'm not going to go into that right now.
Right. No, I understand.
Okay. So now we're ready for the whole fake Pacific theater. Okay. And I have huge problems, not just with the bomb, because we're going to get to the bomb and the bomb is fake. And that's very important. But the whole story of what we're fed about the war in the Pacific is that these Japanese soldiers, they were fanatics and they were irrepressible and they came on in waves and they killed everything in their sight. And now this isn't even a land battle. They came in ships where they had to dock their ships and get their people out of the ships and be in areas that they didn't speak the language or have any knowledge of firsthand, and were in climates that they weren't used to. And yet they were just able to completely wipe out everybody everywhere. No one could stand against them. And it is, the more you look at this, the more insanely ridiculous it is. And I can't go into this because it would be too big of a rant. But there were some actual wars against, where imperial powers tried to take over Asian countries. The Opium War in China was fought against China by the English, and it lasted for years. There was in 2 waves, and it required a whole bunch of other crap it was very, 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 very hard for England or the East India Company to conquer China. That was very tough. It took them years. When they tried to conquer Burma, it took the East India Company years, and it was one of their worst losses ever. It was an absolute disaster where they lost, I think, 100,000 soldiers just trying to take over Burma, and it took years. When the Americans fought against the Philippines, remember how the Battle of Manila Bay was like 5 minutes? Well, that's because it was all fake. Once the Filipinos found out that they weren't actually shaking off the Spanish, they were coming under complete control of the Americans, they rebelled against the Americans. They don't even teach the Philippine-American War. It skipped over in history. It was a horrible war. It lasted 3 years, and it killed 100,000 people. It was absolute disaster, and a whole bunch of Americans died. We don't even teach this war because it was so hard for the Americans to actually take real control of the Filipinos. Same thing in Vietnam, but that's, where we won't even go. So to really take over these countries when people have really tried to seriously take them over it's been very, very difficult. But the Japanese just swept all before them. It's ridiculous. It's insane. And it's all theater. It's the script. It's how they wanted Americans to see the Japanese as these horrible beasts who could sweep everything before them. It's complete BS. Next slide. I just had to show you this because it's so hilarious. So Britain had, of course, Pearl Harbor was America's base, and it just so happened that all of their battleships were in Pearl Harbor at the time it was banned. None of them were where they should have been protecting the Philippines, because it was American Filipino. Remember, we conquered it took us 3 years, and we had to kill 100,000 Filipinos to do it, but we had control of the Philippines. But we didn't have any battleships in the Philippines at this time. They were, but back to England. I'm getting distracted. So it had 2 big military bases, centers of naval centers. One was in Singapore, and one was in Ceylon. And also they had Hong Kong, 2 huge settlements in Hong Kong and Shanghai. There was something called the International Settlement in Shanghai that the British had enormous amounts invested in. So what we were, this is the movie they were showing. The movie that they were showing was Pearl Harbor. Out of the blue gets, the blue there is America, and the red is England. Okay. So Pearl Harbor is very suspicious. They should have known ahead of time. They let it get destroyed. Then Thailand surrendered. Then a few days later, Britain loses its two biggest battleships. And it's a really stupid story. I can't go into it, but they basically sacrificed them because to promote this narrative that the Japanese were unstoppable. Then Hong Kong just threw up their arms and surrendered. Britain did nothing to try to protect them. Hong Kong was Britain's, it was a pure British post, and it didn't even try to defend itself. Manila surrendered without a fight. Now, what's really interesting about this is at the end of the war, when they come back to MacArthur surrendered Manila without a fight. And when he took it back, Manila got completely destroyed. So by Americans, it's terrible. Then Singapore falls. This is the one with the bicycles. Okay. So Singapore is the biggest British base in the area. Okay. And it's got, what does it say? It's got 90,000 troops, huge guns surrounding it. And it was known as Gibraltar of the East, and everybody says it's completely impregnable. But what they never dreamed of was the bicycle blitzkrieg, because what those smart Japanese did is they landed in Thailand and rode their bikes through the jungle to get to the back, unprotected, soft underbelly of Singapore. And they were able to have 30,000 guys on bikes conquer the British defenses. It's so ridiculous.
Here, if I might, here's
Yeah.
what makes me think that this is so. Ridiculous isn't even like a good enough word, but in Seven Pillars of Wisdom and in the movie Lawrence of Arabia, this is the exact strategy that Lawrence used in order to take Aqaba. So Aqaba was this giant Ottoman fortress that had huge guns that were pointed at the ocean in hard placements so they couldn't turn them around. And Lawrence, on a bunch of camels, with 300 or 400 men, like not even that many people, just rode into the back of Aqaba. So this is the exact same thing. This is the exact same script that the British had done 30 years earlier. So for them to be a victim of their own strategy seems incongruous to me.
Well, it is, except that they already had control of Aqaba to begin with. So it's all scripted. This is why when I study 19th century history. So not all battles are scripted, but so many battles are thrown. I would say, for example, Garibaldi, he was everywhere he went. He was like the Japanese, the red shirts, right? In every major battle that he won, it was just come at us, pretend that you're attacking us, and we'll fold. So this is the British were going along with this. They were feeding into the script that the Japanese were unconquerable and everything like this. And it's ridiculous. And the more you look at the Pacific theater with this prism that Japan was just playing a role, and the puppet masters were Britain, and the script was for Japan to conquer everything. They just paved the way for it over and over and over in every way. So
when we say the British too, I think that we have to be careful. We're not talking about
London.
We're not talking about the British people that are getting killed, or like the the thousands of soldiers that are on the Prince of Wales and the Repulse.
Who died horrible deaths.
Who died
Yes.
horrible deaths. We're
Yes.
talking about the City of London banker class that and oligarchs that are basically orchestrating all of these.
And the generals are, and this was, and this is where, like, when you look at Patton, like, Patton was not read in. Okay. He was
Right.
only a 3-star general, and he was like, what the hell? But he didn't shut up. And the reason he did, and because he didn't shut up, he had a car crash that where he bumped his head and died, in the hospital a week later, because, it's just, the generals, the ones who surrender are just contemptible. They're as bad as the bankers. Okay. But anyway, again, the thing, what I'm trying to get to is this is not only a question of the bomb being fake. This is a question of the entire narrative of the Pacific Theater being fake. And so the more you look into this, just understand that Britain is behind everything, and they surrendered. It's just insane. They surrendered both Hong Kong and basically both Canton and Shanghai, gave up without a fight. And this is what I was arguing with the AI with, is they kept giving me reasons why Japan had
Don't argue with AI.
Well, I'm saying, but that doesn't make any sense. And then they're saying, well, they were more concerned about the Europe, and they didn't want to fight war on two fronts. I said, this, Shanghai fell before Hitler even took Czechoslovakia. Okay. So they weren't fighting two fronts. So what are you talking about, Google? I mean, AI. Where are you getting your information? This is complete bullshit.
It's not thinking, it's just pattern matching, and it's pattern matching, it's training data.
And all it can do is tell you the official story, and the official story is bullshit. Okay, let's keep going.
Right.
Now we're almost ready. Are we? Okay, let's. Okay, I'm really quick.
This is the last slide before we get to Hiroshima.
Yeah. So it's just that if you follow the money, the Chi-Coms were funded by the Soviets, and the Soviets were funded by London. And almost all of their equipment was captured. So they were able to capture a whole bunch of Japanese equipment and a whole bunch of KMT as the nationalists. They just captured it all. And the KMT was also funded by the Soviets and by the West. And also Chiang Kai-shek was married into the banking family that controlled all the banks in China, or at least all the ones in Hong Kong. So he had unlimited access to funds. Okay. And Japan was magically, their amazing Bank of Japan could lend them unlimited amounts of money from nowhere, because they had so much credit, because they were winning so many battles and everybody believed in them. So, so it's all funny money. It's nonsense. And here's something else to notice in the map. The red is the communist China. Communist China territory was entirely within the Japanese controlled territory.
Interesting.
So the Chinese communists were incredibly incompetent, and they were unable to tie their shoes, and they didn't have any real power until the fall of Japan. And then the Soviets came down, they're given more money, and then all of the territory that had been held by Japan fell to the communists. And so, and then they still had to conquer the whole rest of China, and magically they were able to do that. It's crazy, but that's later. Okay. Anyway, always follow the money. We're ready to get to the good stuff now after only an hour. So, sorry about taking so long, but I love history. I have to talk about history.
It's all good. It's all
okay.
Good.
So why now? Peter has all these reasons why the bomb was fake. And I didn't even look at any of, like, I figured out all based on what I knew, that it wasn't anything of pieces. So we came to this exact same conclusion by completely different routes. And I think that's really cool. Okay, but this is how I looked at it and how I knew it was fake, but I wasn't going to argue with anybody. I wasn't going to bring it up until, he's out there, out on a limb, telling everybody it's fake. It's like, go, Peter, go. Anyway, so number one, J. Oppenheimer. I know a lot about the Oppenheimer family. The Oppenheimer family has been an international banking family for 200 years before the Rothschilds. Mayer Rothschild, who founded the great, big and scary, the big scary Rothschild banking enterprise, interned with the Oppenheimer at the Oppenheimer branch in Hanover, and got all of his original connections through the Oppenheimers. So the Oppenheimers have been associated with the Rothschilds since 200 years. I mean, they're just that. And the way that the original Oppenheimer, when you look at how, like, Samuel Oppenheimer, who funded Vienna in the Turkish-Vienna War in the 1600s, if you look at how he raised his money, it was exactly the same way that the Rothschilds did. Is he had these, what they were called was court Jews in all over Europe, and they would just exchange money and everything. It was like a network, and they worked very well. And that was before the Rothschilds. So the Rothschilds is just kind of a face to put on a pre-existing network. And the Oppenheimers were a part of the network long before the Rothschilds. And he had no management experience. He was a complete left-winger. And the Oppenheimer, the American wing, there's numerous wings of the Oppenheimer family, but the British wing of the Oppenheimer families is the ones who controlled both the gold and the diamonds in South Africa, which is huge connections to London. I mean, when you control all the gold and diamonds in South Africa, you're pretty, and I think they own a whole bunch of property in England as well. But the American wing that produced the so-called scientist, the sensitive so-called left-wing scientist, who created the bomb and then regretted it. He is from the same family that actually controls Idaho. As it turns out, Idaho is run by Oppenheimers. So that's why I know so much about Oppenheimers. They're my home state oligarchs. Okay. So, anyway, so when I see when I see Oppenheimer, it's like, that's all I need to know. I can quit, but I'm not. I don't quit. Okay. So the bomb was planned at Bohemian Grove. I'm not going to go into that. I know if you don't know what Bohemian Grove is, you're going to have to look it up from somebody else. It's awful. The Office of Scientific Research and Development, from which all the was part of the Office of Emerging Management, both were formed by Roosevelt before Pearl Harbor. Yet this planning meeting didn't really happen until 1942, and the bomb was dropped less than 3 years later. Now, I was a Silicon Valley engineer that worked on projects, and the whole idea that you could start and come up with a bomb, even if it was technically possible in this amount of time, is just crazy. But they had to have a narrative. You have to be very, very careful when you're doing a fake bomb. Okay. You have to make it look really, really difficult and really, really hard, because think about it. If it had just been 40, 50 or 60 scientists with unlimited funds, with maybe a couple hundred technicians helping them in Los Alamos, then they couldn't keep up this ridiculous story that it's hard to have a bomb. I mean, hasn't Iran been trying to build a bomb for like
40
years now, or 50? And they can't quite make it, but they might be able to do it at any time. And they've got, so they had to make it seem as though it was, Yeah, they had to make it seem as though it was, this big hard thing. So it employed 5,000 scientists at 3 locations, and everybody was working really hard. It has to be hard. It has to be difficult.
Right.
There has to be secrets that you can leak the bad guy, somebody or other leaked the secrets to the Soviets, so they got the bomb. So it's just nuts. But on the face of it, you couldn't, if it's anywhere near as complicated as they're trying to make it out to be, it couldn't have been done in 3 years. You can't have it both ways. It can't be done quickly, and it can't take 20 years to do.
Teresa, do you know who first mentioned the atomic bomb?
Who?
The first mention was the Cecil Rhodes Roundtable member H.G. Wells in a novel called The World Set Free, written in 1913 and published in 1914. Isn't that curious?
They had to make it credible, like they had to have a story of how we were splitting the atoms and blah 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 blah. Okay, so the concept was there. They had anyway. It's crazy. It's just nuts. So Oppenheimer, and then just the way it's set up. I'm already don't believe it. Okay, so next there's more things not to believe.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, this was one of the arguments in the Eustace Mullins book, and it's like, oh God, he's right. Okinawa was this very, very bloody battle that was fought before Pearl Harbor on an island. They did the whole thing as island battles. They were always island battles because when you have an island battle, you know exactly who's on the island. You've got control of the horizontal, vertical. You've got control of the cameras, lights, camera, action. You can do your battle as long as it's on an island. So Okinawa was this horrendously bloody battle with huge loss of life. And I don't know how much is real, how much is fake. Obviously, people died. Obviously, things got blown up. I don't know how much was done in front of the, whatever. But the purpose of Okinawa was to create the narrative that it would have been it's back to the unstoppable Japanese. Oh, they roll over everything. They're fierce fighters. They have kamikaze, blah, 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 fanatics.
They're fanatics.
Yeah. And so, it's, but look at where Okinawa is. It's 1,000 miles from Tokyo. Why do you need Okinawa? I mean, what kind of a base is that for attacking the Japanese mainland? It's an insane base. Same with Iwo Jima. There's no purpose for these islands. There's no real strategic. They'll make up some strategic purpose for them, but they're completely. It's ridiculous. If you want to conquer Japan, you can just come across. Right? This is Russian territory up here. Fukushima, whatever. It's Russian territory. You can. It's closer than Okinawa. There was never a reason to take Okinawa. So
I think that the argument is that they were using them to launch all their bombers. Say thousands of bombers came off of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, I think.
Right, but why couldn't they use there? We were allied with Russia, right?
Correct, but
there's many closer islands. There's many closer islands.
I think technically, didn't the Russians not declare war on Japan until after we dropped the bomb?
I think so.
Yeah, I think we dropped the bomb, and the Russians declared war against Japan the next day, and the Russians took great advantage of the Japan surrendering because. They came in so late in declaring war on Japan that they got to grab huge amounts of territory as a result.
Well, that was all. That was always the plan. They didn't want to. I still think it was island theater. So we just take for granted that their story is. There's just a lot of things that.
Yeah, to your point, it served the narrative more than any kind of strategic military purpose.
Right, and there's certainly other islands you could take. So, if you're gonna lose, 30,000 men taking an island, you might as well take an island worth having. Okay, so but it's all BS. Okay, So, you have, I'm trying to forward the slide and it's not forwarding. I'm hitting my button. Okay. So, and then the other thing is the witnesses where we learn about what happened. Okay. And I learned this from reading, when I was, Catholic history, and so I'm reading about the Jesuit order, and this is like a long time ago. And the first English speaker on site was a man named Pedro Arrupi, who was a Jesuit. And I'm not going to go into how corrupt the Jesuits are right now, but to me, when I see a Jesuit was the first person on site, that's automatically suspicious. And to make it even more suspicious, he was in a home, a Jesuit house, 4 miles from the center of the blast, just 4 miles. None of the 8 Jesuits were seriously injured. None of them, and most of them lived to be ripe old age and with no health problems. So none of the stories about radiation poisoning or anything like that, there's no element of that. Now, some people will say this was a miracle. They were protected because it was a miracle, but I'm not really in that camp. So I think he's suspicious, especially, and the reason I was reading about him was not having to do with the bomb. It was about the Vatican II, and he was one of the main, he became the superior general of the Jesuit order like 20 years later. So and this was one of the things, it was one of those things where he said it really changed him and he made him realize that we're, blah blah blah, so so he's not a credible, that's a red flag. Another huge red flag is the guy who wrote Hiroshima. Now, this was published about a year after the bomb, but it was published in a magazine, and he had gone and interviewed all the survivors. And he has this narrative, it's the narrative journalism where, you make it a story, and it's, forget just the facts, ma'am. You have to develop the people and go through their suffering and all this sort of stuff.
We talked about Herodotus before, right? So it's the Herodian method, right?
Oh, no. That was Plutarch.
Plutarch, sorry.
Herodotus is pretty amusing, but he's mostly just facts. He tells some pretty wild stories, but it's Plutarch that does the posturing. Okay. It's all, the posturing. So, but anyway, John Hersey, the author, Yale University, big red flag. They're all, they were the people. There's whole articles on this that I'm not an expert on, but behind the whole communist, movement, philosophy, a very, very big relationship between Yale and China. And in fact, John Hersey grew up in China as the son of missionaries, definitely CIA. And he was skull and bones at Yale. So, if you don't, I can't explain the problem with skull and bones and the problem with Jesuit leaders.
Unless
you already know.
Mao Zedong was trained at Yale in China.
Yeah. So Yale is ground zero of you said that they had the East India Company papers too, so they must be super.
Yale has the East India Company papers. Yale was founded by Elihu Yale. Is that what his name?
Elijah. You're right. It's Elihu.
Elihu Yale, who was the head of the East India Company in what's it called? What's it called now? Matthew Crawford has done a ton of work on it. It's where Kamala Harris's family is from. Oh, they have a neighborhood there, Chushai, but Madras. It was called Madras.
Oh,
so Madras, and they were big on slaves. So the money that was used to basically what happened is Elihu Root sent a bunch of merchandise. He didn't send cash. He sent merchandise. It wasn't Cotton Mather. Maybe it was Cotton Mather's father. Anyway, he sent a bunch of merchandise to the United States and said, sell this merchandise and then use the proceeds from selling the merchandise to build the university. So that's how Yale University was started, with money that was, the merchandise was the goods that he got from selling slaves and opium in Madras.
I wish I could, maybe we can make sure that somehow or other to link to, there's a really good article on Substack that does an excellent job of this. I linked to it on my Substack thing. But there's somebody who really did very, very good research into the connections between Yale and communist China. So that's a great path to go down. He knew a whole bunch of stuff I never knew.
Yeah, and Matthew Crawford on roundingtheearth.substack.com has done a ton of work on Madras and that. Annie Besant, who was the famous theosophist, I think she was also in the Fabian Society, moved to Madras, and there's an entire neighborhood in Madras called Besant. And it's
wow.
And it's nice. It's on the beach. It's like the Miami Beach neighborhood in Madras. So
yeah, I hate what some of these people do to these countries, but the history itself is very interesting. But again, I look at the real battle of civilization happened in the 19th century, and civilization lost, so and China just, oh my gosh, the stuff China, in order to put down China and bring it totally to heel, it's just absolutely horrible what they did to China. At least Japan, it was quick and merciful. I mean, it wasn't merciful at all. That's a wrong word. It's the opposite of that. But it was, it was like,
surgical.
It was put down quickly. It didn't, Anyway, so let's keep going to get through it. I made too many slides. So, okay. So I'm going to rant a little bit about this, because this is where my argument is that any 14-year-old boy playing Risk or Stratego or whatever could figure out how to keep Japan under control. Japan was 100% dependent on oil. Japan was a naval power. The Navy took 2/3 of its oil supply to run its Navy. Japan without oil was a turtle on its back. It was fine without oil until the British came on and tried to turn it into something. And so again, the justification for Japan taking over all this territory was that it needed raw materials. Well, it needed a lot of raw materials, but none of China does not have its own oil. Manchuria doesn't have oil. None of those places that was taking over have any oil. It was getting its oil from the United States. And the only other, it could have also sailed ships to the Gulf to get it, but there was also oil in Indonesia. So there's two closest sources are the United States, West Coast, mostly California, and the oil wells in Indonesia. Those are only two. Okay, if you're a 14-year-old boy and you're playing a military strategy game, it's pretty obvious what you need to do to get your enemy. You just protect, you cut off supplies from those two sources, and you make sure that those, that your military is making sure that they can't come and take those sources. Well, they're not going to take California. So that means what needs to be protected is you have to cut off supplies from California, and then you have to cut off supplies from Indonesia, and boom, they're helpless. But the British and the Americans did the exact opposite. They did everything they could. They knew that they spent 3 years delaying cutting off oil to Japan while it built up its empire, where it was obvious had horrible, there was already news of atrocities. and it was taking
You're
over.
talking Shanghai and
Shanghai. It took over Shanghai in 37. It took over Canton in 38. And both of those were allowed it to go without a fight. I think Hitler had already taken over Czechoslovakia in 38, but Britain hadn't declared war. And so when you try and get any explanation of why the hell didn't Britain protect its interest in China, it was, well, they were tied up in Europe. No, they weren't. And Hitler hadn't even done the things that caused them to panic about Hitler, but they were worried about, but Churchill knew that he was going to, and the reason Churchill knew that he was going to is he was read into the planet. So this is why he sounds so smart. Chamberlain, was the past, he knew all along what was going to happen. He's completely FOS. Anyway, so Pearl Harbor was known to be a false flag. John Flynn wrote he published this in 1945, and he was going to publish it sooner, and he held off publishing it until after the war because he thought
authors that tried to report books like this during the war got thrown in jail.
Right. And he knew that. He knew that once we had boots on the ground and there was American lives at risk, we just had to win the war. It was too late. I mean, it wasn't going to bring anything back to reveal this. But he did all this research. He was a reporter who did his homework and understood and read the papers and read the he went and got the documents that proved that they knew about this. And they not only knew about it, they set things up for it to happen exactly how it happened. So it was all premeditated. And there's other things like, for example, to get to the Indonesia, you have to go right through the Philippines. Well, America was holding the Philippines. It was holding the Philippines until I'm losing it. Who's the
MacArthur was in
MacArthur. I was calling MacArthur. I was going to go. Yeah, MacArthur. Until MacArthur just walked away, no fight, and then there was the Bataan, and he withdrew to the Bataan Peninsula, blah blah blah, to preserve so that Manila wouldn't get bombed.
Right.
But when he had to take back the Philippines to make it look like America was actually fighting this war, he completely he flattened Manila to the ground. America flattened it, not Japan. Japan just walked in and took it over because he left it completely undefended. So it's complete, the first thing you would do if you had half a brain. Now, of course, remember, the British completely controlled the entire petroleum market. The Dutch were their allies, and they knew all about, they are the ones who created this dependence on oil. They knew, you can't not see that Japan was completely oil, and the easiest way to shut them down would be to shut off their oil supply. They have no response for that. They were never a difficult thing to deal with. Instead of cutting things off, both America and Britain did everything they could to facilitate this Japan conquest of everything. And then they expended hundreds, thousands of American and British lives winning it back from Japan. It's completely despicable. Okay. So, and this is from Eustace Mullins, and the authenticity of that quote is challenged because it isn't in any of the published records. So I forget where he got this, but anyway. So, but basically this is where they're saying we need to keep Japan. Japan was out of oil and could not continue fighting, and most of its navy was grounded before they dropped the bomb. And other historians have pointed this out, because anybody who looks at the course of the world, like I said, turtle on its back without oil.
And the story that we're told is that the Japanese, the only request that they had was that the emperor got to remain the emperor. at the end of the war, that was the big thing, and that the
unconditional surrender, except we get to keep the emperor.
right, exactly.
And the
and
reason
the emperor was created by what you're saying, it was created by the British Empire.
The reason that they needed that for their narrative,
right,
is because according to their narrative, the Japanese people were completely brainwashed zombies, and they would do anything for the emperor. They worshipped the emperor. They thought the emperor was a god. They would sacrifice their life for the emperor. The emperor was the blah blah blah. Which is that's like if somebody tries to tell you that like Catholics are all 100% devoted to the Pope, and you know, I know of at least one exception to that. Okay, so let's go on before I get into any more trouble.
Right.
Okay, so then another thing that's super suspicious is, so, and this is right out in 1984. You know, that this is the 5-minute hate, and then the next day you come there and there are allies, right? I mean, during the war, millions of these video reels of, you know, jungle warriors and fanatics and kamikaze pilots and all this, you know, bloodthirsty savage, everything. And the Bataan Death March, the rape of Nanking, you know, all these legends of Japanese cruelty and savagery and, you know, fearlessness. And then flip a switch, and they're the best people in the world, and they're the most loyal allies and the hardest working people and just really good people. And they just got misled by a couple imperial generals, and the people themselves are just sweethearts, and they're our closest allies. Okay, this happened
anime
overnight. Oh, anime, gosh, what about those Hondas and Toyotas from the 80s? I mean, everybody, you know, the electronics, oh my gosh, you know, Sony Walkman, woo, you know, it's just, so you pointed out there's you told me about this video that I listened to, what's it called, Princess of the Yen
by Richard Werner. Yeah.
And it very much, I mean, it starts after the war.
Right.
Okay. And it explains how in no time at all, the Japan economy recovered no problem.
Simply by printing money.
Right. There was no reparations, no war, you know, all the war crimes were pardoned. No, that's not true. They had a couple, you know.
Well, it's very convenient when your entire infrastructure believes in harikari, right? And then they all kill themselves, or they kill themselves. I have a theory that I'm working on right now that everyone that we think dies, that we've got questions whether or not they're actually dead or not, they wind up in Madagascar, which is why DreamWorks made a movie about Madagascar, which conveniently is about 2 blacks and 2 Jews that get moved to Madagascar by these guys dressed in black who have no elbows. So whenever they say smile and wave, they're doing this. I digress.
I 100% agree with Lake. We know pretty much, like, the reason Hitler was blown up in his underground bunker was so that he could take the escape hatch and go to Argentina, right?
See, that's the story. I don't think he went to Argentina. I think he went to Madagascar. I think that's a fallback position. So they've got the FBI running around Argentina looking for him when he's in Madagascar.
Well, in any case, I 100% agree with you. And this is like, I think even in the French Revolution, you know, a bunch of the people who died didn't die. So, and that's kind of the plot of Tale of Two Cities, right? Is they execute somebody publicly who isn't the person that's being executed. You know,
that's the conceit of the whole book, right? It's
right.
The big switcheroo at the end. Yeah.
Right. That's
the Masons would call that a hoodwink. right?
The Masons would call that hoodwinkers, right? Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, so this is, I don't, that movie, anyway, that video explains it way better. But anyway,
Princes of the End.
This chart shows you that in it, the other thing that, the other way to shut Japan down is money, because to fund this war effort, they had to raise billions and billions of dollars. And they had no trouble at all raising it. And it was all raised at par. I mean, there was no discount. There was no inflation. And supposedly their money used to come from Western sources, but then they transferred, the banks transferred it so that they were only getting money from the Axis powers for the last couple of years, so that it wouldn't look like Americans had any more control over the Bank of Japan, which had been very obvious before. But they were borrowing money from these Axis powers at the same time the Axis powers themselves were building up for war for their own money. So it's all, there's only one big ocean of money, and it's just that, right, like we said, they have to make it look like it's coming from Japan, or, they can't have it obviously be coming from the people running California or whatever. It can't have American names attached to it. But so they were able to run all this money, and then this picture shows how then they spanked their debt again later. But that's what that other movie. But anyway, but they were covered completely, just clean state, start from scratch, which is crazy, because this is not what other countries have ever done when they lost wars, especially wars of this nature. It's just it's not even, even Germany got cut in half. I mean, it suffered consequences. So it's crazy, and it's all military. We're all expected to go from their bloodthirsty savages to their good citizens overnight. We're expected to not have any issues with that. It's all been explained. So anyway, so I think we're just about done. I can go back and talk a little bit more about money. Anyway, so
this is the last slide.
Last slide. So this is how the communists overran China, and this is more ridiculousness, and it's too complicated to go over. But I'm just going to talk about the money aspect of it, because obviously, what you see in the purple is the area controlled by the communists in 1946 at the end of the war. That corresponds exactly to the territory, well, not exactly, but very close to the territory that was held by the Japanese. So basically, the Japanese, who were puppets of the London, turned over all of their territory to the communists with the help of the Soviet Union, because I think the Soviet Union washed in there and pushed out the Japanese again overnight. Of course, I think this was after the bomb, so supposedly they all just retreated, and all that territory went to the communists. So the communists were completely incompetent. They couldn't do anything without being dragged across the finish line, because
it's like the Bolsheviks.
Yeah, they were supposed to make a better show of fighting the Japanese. They didn't fight the Japanese. They were just completely allowed to coexist with the Japanese, because they were all under the same whatever. But of course, the nationalists were also in on the game. They were 100% in on the game, and the nationalist Chiang Kai-shek, again, he's married into the Song family. The Song family ran the banking system in China for the British, okay, and had for
and Chiang Kai-shek moved to, when the communists took over, he just moved over to Taiwan.
Right.
Yeah.
Which had also been held by Japan. So, but it was real, like, you just couldn't get the communists to win. So what you had to do was how did they destroy Japan? They had to implode the currency. So China was always controlled by these British banks, and then all of a sudden they started printing huge amounts of paper money that wasn't backed by gold to cause rampant inflation and destroy the government and destroy the economy and piss people off. And when you've got 300% inflation a year, it destroys anybody and everybody. It pisses everybody off. It's non-functional. And it was induced because the people who were doing it, who were printing all this money, were the people who had control of everything. And then they were trying to make excuses for it. They said it was all the corruption. The Chiang Kai-sheks were just super corrupt. Well, I don't doubt that, but they already were multi-bazillionaires, and so they had to explain where all the American money went. And it was, they confiscated all the money that was sent by foreign governments. But they were super incredibly rich to begin with. Why would somebody who already had access to $500 million steal another $500 million? It doesn't really, it's crazy. It's just ridiculousness. But what's also even more ridiculousness is that as the currency was collapsing among the nationalists, the communists had solid currency. They had a bank behind them that was funded, that the president of I don't have the name of the bank. It was like the Soviet Chinese Bank or something like that. It was run by Mao Zedong's brother. And he was in control of that bank before the rise of Mao Zedong. So Mao was
all wars are
another banking, a puppet. He was the brother of the guy who ran the communist bank, which had solid money. And don't get me go down this path because the whole story of the communist bank is whatever. But the whole idea that the communists would have solid money, and the nationalists who were tied to these British banks that had been solid and had for over 100 years in China was collapsing with all this inflation is crazy on the surface of it. It's just nuts. It's all money manipulation. You won the war by manipulating the currency.
It sounds to me crazy. Like the what happened with the Bolsheviks and the White Russians, because the British were financing both of them.
Yeah, right? They always do.
The City of London and Wall Street were funding the Bolsheviks and the White Russians, and yes. by turning the knobs on the money, they could determine which ones were going to which ones were going to win and which ones were going to lose. It's not much more complicated than that.
No, in fact, so my sons love war. Okay, so we all did, yeah. Okay, so
John Wayne and the television show Combat, and
one of the reasons I got into all this history is I had to keep feeding my sons these books about wars, and so me being of female persuasion and not really all that interested in guns and battle and the exact size of the tanks that were it's crazy. The size, or were those 13-inch guns or 19-inch? I don't. They care. I don't care. Anyway, so but to me, when I look at war, I think logistics and how do people get their supplies? How do they get the funds? How do they get the weapons? How do they provision the armies? How do they get from one place to another? And when you look at war that way and you just ignore the battles, of course, all these books are all about the battles and the dramas and the battles. And I can see how people would not see the drama in the logistics, but I'm logistics. and I see drama in the logistics of these wars. And there are a lot of them are, many battles in history. I can't prove it, but you can tell were thrown. Many battles, certainly in the Pacific theater, but I think the Battle of Valmy was thrown. I think, like I said, I think everything Garibaldi ever did was thrown, that he succeeded in. Just the list of thrown battles goes on and on. And the list of wars that have lasted longer than they needed to, like the Civil War and American Civil War, that was scheduled to be a long, destructive, expensive war.
Right.
They did,
and that matches the work that John O'Dowd and Jim McGregor and the other guy, I can't remember, who wrote Hidden History and Prolonging the Agony.
Yeah, prolonging the agony. Because if what you're trying to do is bankrupt everybody and destroy things, you can't just do that with a blitzkrieg, So
right.
They have
that probably also explains what's going on in Ukraine right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I have a question, because I kind of feel like it's a buried lead. We've been going for an hour and 45 minutes. Why do you think that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were chosen as targets? Because it seemed like you were leading up to that. And
I've heard it was like Nagasaki was the center of Catholicism and that FDR was a Freemason. But I think it's more complicated than that. And I don't really have, I should have a theory about it. I kind of think Nagasaki was destroyed because I think probably there was a lot of foreign interference and foreign monkey business going on in Nagasaki, that it was more convenient for it to be wiped out historically. So you just couldn't see all the monkey business going on in Nagasaki. I'm pretty not sure Nagasaki, but that's just a theory. If you have a good idea about this, I'd love to hear it. Because I don't. But I did want to mention to people that, and I'll post this as a link in the description when we get going. But I mean, when I post this thing, that there is a video that I have linked in many of my articles. I'm trying to remember what it's called. The title of it is Atomic Bomb Hope, Nukes Don't Exist, where a guy goes through all of the records of the United States Air Forces. It was Army Air Force at the time, bombing runs in the days leading up to Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And he thinks that he figured out how he thinks that they were flattened with conventional weapons. One of the things that Michael Palmer writes about in his book, Revisiting Hiroshima, is that the evidence based on what it looked like was much more in line with a conventional firebombing with some mustard gas added. There are people who theorize that thermobaric weapons were used, but basically he's gone through and he's created this spreadsheet of bombing runs, determining what could have wound up flattening Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then you add in a little bit of Hollywood magic on top of it, and you tell everybody that it was a nuclear weapon. You get witnesses to show up who conveniently speak English and lived 4 miles away. Yeah.
Okay. And they wind up telling this big story about the atomic flash. And, we have lots of videos from that moment in time, but there's nothing. One of the things about an atomic weapon is that you don't really have very many eyewitnesses that you can go interview. And if they don't speak your language, that's even more convenient if you're trying to craft a narrative. And
there's all sorts of, like, one of the things I looked up once, and I don't have it with me, is the amount of money just the United States has spent on nuclear weapons.
Right.
Is in the near trillions.
No, I think it's trillions.
Okay. And where did that money go? I mean, it's a fantastic black op, you know. And you're right. I mean, you employ hundreds and thousands of people, and you build the rockets, and
because of compartmentalization, and
Yeah.
you need to know that nobody knows the whole story.
You can be building a rocket and designing a rocket to carry a payload, and that payload can be Navy beans. And it doesn't have, you know, it doesn't have to be a nuclear warhead. It just has to have all sorts of, you know, things that look like they might be related. I love that picture of that empty. Yeah, that's just, you know, and think about this. And then you talked about in when you did this presentation about how everybody's in on it. Well, number one, I think it's one world government anyway. So of course everybody's in on it from day one. But you know, all these stories about the
key word,
sharing the secrets, you know.
When I started doing the game theory math, and you know, you ask a question, like you see these formulas for game theory, and they've got weird letters and stuff on them, and you're trying to figure out what they mean. But at the end of the day, all they mean is that you need to make sure that the people in the military industrial complex are making enough money doing it that it is in their own best interest to not tell anybody that it's fake. It's in the military's best interest to not tell anybody that it's fake. It's in the Russians' best interest and the Israelis.
Well, how many people actually know that it's fake? I think 90% of the people, it's not something everybody needs to know. It's something that anybody can figure out just by logic, but you don't have to have it.
Like I believe that we have internet. I believe that we have intercontinental ballistic missiles in submarines and in silos. I believe that there are weapons that can get loaded onto B-52s and other bombers that have that are marked nuclear weapons that have all kinds of safety protocols that are in place in order to make sure that people will either deploy them when they're, in the case of somebody who's sitting in a missile silo, that when they're ordered to do it, that they'll do it, or drop it when they're ordered to drop it. I believe that there's all those mechanisms in place. I just don't know what happens when one of those things gets dropped, because my guess is that it's probably not much more powerful than a V2, which was something Werner von Braun, was launching against London in 1944. It probably has a big explosive warhead in it, and it probably will blow the shit out of a building if it hits it. But I'm not sure that it's going to take out an entire town.
I don't really know how dangerous. I mean, I suspect like the stuff they used in Venezuela is stuff that is, beyond our even, we're not even told, we're not even worried about it because we don't even know what the hell they're doing, but it's with wavelengths and with, there's very dangerous things you can do just with directed energy weapons or something like that.
Yeah. You could make everybody vomit.
Like you can make Maui disappear, stuff like that. I mean, there's very, very dangerous weapons, and they do have very dangerous weapons. But I think they're even kind of they're really the thing I showed about the Union of Atomic Scientists turning to global warming to try and keep the panic up is very revealing. And I think it suits the narrative for us to destroy all the nuclear weapons. I think remember how, we're decommissioning most of our nuclear weapons and we're having trouble.
Well, here's what I found out. Somebody who listens to this show texted me one day and asked me to go look up. I can't remember the name of the program is, but when I first got involved when I first became friends with George Webb, he was talking about this program that was from the I think they were called the SALT treaties and strategic arms limitation talks. And they resulted in something called megatons to megawatts, where the Soviet Union had fallen, and so the Clinton administration and the ex-Soviet Russians were going to, and Ukrainians were going to negotiate what to do with all of the extra nuclear weapons that they had, because supposedly there were 30,000 nuclear warheads, and the idea was that the Americans and the Russians were going to decommission most of their thermonuclear weapons and turn them into nuclear fuel rods in order to be able to boil water to make electricity. And so the Russians built a factory and the Americans built a factory, and they pulled a bunch of their old nuclear weapons offline, and they took the highly enriched uranium and they downsampled it so that they could make uranium fuel rods, because the uranium that you need to boil water is not highly enriched. In order to make it a thermonuclear weapon, it has to have trillions of dollars worth of refining done. Okay. And so I went and I looked. The Russians built a factory. The Russians processed all of their highly enriched uranium into nuclear fuel rods, and they're using them to this day. Okay. The Americans never finished the factory and never downsampled the highly enriched uranium into nuclear fuel rods. The factory, 20 years later, the factory remains, after spending over $1.5 billion to build the factory, not 1 ounce of highly enriched uranium has gone through this to be downsampled. So, and the excuse is that there was only one customer, and that was Duke Energy, and that Duke Energy and that the United States had they were decommissioning all of their nuclear power plants, so they didn't have any reason to downsample all of the uranium because there's nobody else in the world who would buy a fuel rod from the United States for their nuclear power plant. So the excuse is that there's no market for the downsampled uranium, and so we just never even though we signed a treaty with the Russians, that we've just never got around to downsampling all of our highly enriched uranium.
And who knows what the Russians did, and who knows,
Right, exactly.
Once you realize that everybody's lying about everything, you don't know what, that it's all ridiculous. So again, I'm happy that there's no nukes. I mean, I think that's good. I think, it's not good that we have, a bunch of pathological liars running our government, but that's how it's been for most of the last 200 years. So,
but that's been the big excuse in Iran, is that for 40 years, the Israelis and the Americans have been saying, we can't let the Iranians have a nuclear weapon. We can't let the North Koreans have a nuclear weapon. It's a big, it's like we landed on the moon. We didn't land on the moon. Okay. Artemis is not going around the moon because the astronaut this morning lied about seeing the dark side of the moon when they're not there yet. So we're just being lied to. And so I'm not afraid of nuclear weapons. That doesn't mean that I'm not afraid of big explosions.
Or these other energy and electronic weapons, like that. Whatever they did in Venezuela wasn't even a directed energy weapon. It was some sort of energy thing that made everybody unconscious. I don't know exactly what it was. They haven't published the specifications for it yet. There's dangerous weapons, and there's very, very dangerous weapons, and they're in the hands of lunatics. But
to wind this up, the most dangerous weapon is the story. The stories wind up becoming the most dangerous weapon, because
the story is what is something you can do about. You can stop believing what you're told and stop being afraid of everything they want you to be afraid of. Because I think a whole lot of the purpose of what they're doing is to induce fear. And if you just decide to not be afraid, I decided that a long time ago. I couldn't find, you have to choose to not be afraid, and it's a choice. So
I think that's the best advice that you could give people. Yeah. My first leading indicator of epistemological warfare is that the more ubiquitous a transmedia story is, meaning you see it in books, you see it in newspapers, you see it in the movies, you see it on television, hear it on the radio, they're making songs about it. The more ubiquitous a fear-based story is, the more you have to question it.
Yeah. And sometimes you just have to ignore it. if there's a wall of bogus information coming at you, just go take a walk. Because, I mean, that's how I coped with the Charlie Kirk story mostly. I'm going to
end with a story. I came home from third grade at Serenia Avenue Elementary School in Woodland Hills, California, when I was a kid, and we had done a drop drill that day. And and I had asked my dad whether or not he thought I should be afraid of a nuclear weapon, and he said, "Nah." He goes, "I'm not afraid of nuclear weapons." And I said, "Gee whiz, why not?" And he goes, "If you get hit by a nuclear bomb," and I said, "Yeah," and he goes, "You'll never know it."
Right.
So that's kind of where I've taken it. So I'm gonna say thank you for this 2 hours, and you've been very gracious with your time.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm sure that people will have all kinds of questions for you in the comments below. We'll put this up on Substack, and it'll go up on YouTube.
Okay, terrific.
And then if people want to find you and support you, they can go to heritage-history.com, where you've got a website that you've built targeted for homeschool teachers in history. Is that,
yeah, we showed it on the first video we did, and maybe next time we should show it again. But it's you go to Heritage History, and then libraries, and then secret, and that's when you get to the good stuff. But the whole rest of the website is all about regular history, conventional history, that's written, easy to understand books, just so you can get up to speed.
All right, let me pull it up and I'll show you.
I read conventional history a lot. I still do, and it's a lot of information. It's just not all true,
Okay, but people have hung in this long. Tell them, what's the secret?
Go to library, and then
you go to library.
Yeah,
right?
And then go to secret.
And then you go all the way over here on the right side. It says secret.
And that's where you get about secret societies. And like I said in my other video, I did conventional history for about 10 years. And then I started going down the secret society rat hole. And it's not really, rabbit hole. And it's just fun. And I encourage you to do it. It's a different way of looking about history. At some point, I'm going to post on my Substack useful information. I'm probably not going to get around to it till this summer. But I will eventually kind of get this information on the Substack. I'm busy during the year, and I'll work on this at night in the summer when I'm less busy all the time.
Well, thank you very much. With that, I'm going to say, if you want to support the Duke Report, you got all the information down here. Become a paid subscriber if you like content like this at the Duke Report. You can go to thedukereport.substack.com, or if you just go to thedukereport.com, it will redirect you to Substack. Or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/the Duke Report, and you can help us continue to do this stuff, because it all costs money. The technology costs money, and the time costs money, and anything that you can do. But if you can't afford to subscribe, share this information with your friends, because the way that this works is that if people understand that the world isn't organized the way that they're being told, the best way that they can learn about this stuff is one-on-one with somebody else who's figuring it out. I appreciate the fact that people share videos, and it's great. But I think it's more important that you learn this stuff for yourself, so that you can actually have a one-on-one conversation with somebody else, because that's really the way that this thing works. I believe that if you try to lead a movement, they've figured it out for a millennia now, how to take out people who are really well organized. Look at what happened to Charlie Kirk.
Well, there's no danger of that for me. I'm not going to lead any movement,
And I'm definitely not trying to lead a movement. I'm trying to but I am trying to get the information out there. And I think that Mrs. Heritage History, you're trying to do the same thing. And with that, I'm going to say hasta la vista, and I'm going to stop recording now, and then you and I can finish up. All right.
Perfect.
So,